On Practical 365, what we're not trying to do is be the reference guide for Office 365. We're trying to provide practical guides on how to do this and that. But it'd be really good, wouldn't it, if you had a full reference book that gave you loads of great advice alongside that, and it was always updated. So when the Office 365 for IT Pros team came along to us, Tony Redmond said, can you have a read of the book and tell us what you think and see whether it's worth recommending? And the short answer, it is. But I also wanted to have a chat with Tony Redmond and find out more about what goes into creating a book that goes into such depth on Office 365.
Thank you, Tony Redmond, for joining me on the Practical 365 YouTube channel to talk a little bit more about Office 365 for IT Pros 2020/6th edition.
Yep.
Welcome to Practical 365, Tony.
Thank you. It's lovely to be a practical person.
Well, you helped us recruit a few last year, and no doubt we'll rope you in again at Ignite.
Yep.
But Office 365 for IT Pros is seen by a lot of people, even since the first edition when it was for Exchange admins, as sort of the reference guide for Office 365. And it's evolved a lot over the years. But with so much documentation and with Microsoft trying to make it seem really easy just to do this whole Office 365 thing, why do we need a book for Office 365?
Well, if it was only trying to be a reference manual, you wouldn't need it because the reference manual is online. That's Microsoft Docs. I think the difference is in a number of factors. The first thing is that we try and apply hard experience, practical experience, as you may want me to say, to Office 365 and give people our unvarnished opinion about what's good and what's not so good. I don't think the writers of the Microsoft documentation have the luxury of doing that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think we look at topics in the full context of Office 365. And what I mean by that is that, again, the writers are assigned to a particular workload or a particular app. They work with a development group. They document what that development group does. They don't document the way that the technology works with other parts of the service, whereas we do. We look at the whole thing and we try and say, you know, this is good if you use it like this. It's maybe not so good if you use it like that. So it's really not a reference. I go back a long time to the earliest books I ever tried to do, which is in the late 80s. And to me, the best approach I ever took was when I did a cookbook, which was kind of a set of recipes for doing stuff right. And I think the same thing holds today. This is our approach. This is how we think things could be done right. So it's not a reference. It's more of a cookbook, and it's based on hard experience. And we got a great bunch of people writing as part of the author team, all of whom have got their own views. I mean, Stally Hansen has got a very different view to the rest of us because he looks at, you know, Teams and calling and voice and video and all that type of stuff. He has a different experience, background, and attitude to say something like Brian Desmond, who comes from the Active Directory world. So, but collectively, we all come together to give this view on how to do Office 365, what we think the right way, effectively. Practically even.
Well, yeah, that is very true. If you've got a SharePoint person or someone from a SharePoint background doing Office 365 and you talk about personas, they'll be wanting to think about everyone getting around in a room and talking about their problems and drawing up wireframes for how things should look. But if you get a UC person in the room, they'll be thinking about, you know, how a contact center person uses a phone and how they might in the service. So it is different perspectives, but I'd also agree, techniques didn't need to be rewritten.
No.
So a lot of the time, books were filling in a lot of the missing guidance. And Microsoft Docs has come on a long way, but sometimes you look at a reference for something and it'll be focused on how a commandlet works, not on the bigger picture for why should you use that that set of commands. How could you use it the right way? Where a cookbook fits in, and you need more than just a recipe for disabling mailboxes these days. You need a bigger picture for how do you put all of this technology together, because there's so much of it. It's so vast. How do you start with so many different ways of doing something?
So let's just, I mean, I think you're hitting on a really important point here. If you take PowerShell, the documentations about all the commandlets focus inherently on the commandlet and the module that the commandlet belongs to. Whereas when you try and solve problems, that's what we like to do. Solve admin problems with PowerShell to automate common processes. Inside Office 365, you're probably going to use the Azure AD module. You're probably going to use the Exchange module, the SharePoint module, the Teams module. In fact, for Teams, you're definitely going to be, you don't want to be constrained with Teams because some of the stuff can only be got through going and getting information about the Office 365 group, or going back to Azure and getting information about the Azure group, or even calling the Microsoft Graph through PowerShell to get some information that's totally unexposed in any of the other modules. So again, while the Microsoft documentation has improved dramatically over the years, dramatically, I can't emphasize that much, it still is constrained by the link that exists between the doc writers and the development groups.
I had someone at Microsoft once say, I know Microsoft Office 365 so well. I know it from the inside out. I know it inside out. And ever since I thought about that, and how they worked as an escalation engineer and all those kind of things, you think that's quite right. You know it from the inside out. What's the perspective Tony Redmond brings to it, and it's seeing it from the outside in, like people who buy it, and you don't have that baggage of knowing how it was designed to be used, but you know how it should be used.
No, I wouldn't even say that. I think it's a case of I have a strong opinion about how it should be used, and I have a strong view on how it's come about, and I guess a lot of that is just through experience. Been watching Office 365 evolve for the last eight or 9 years. So that's one thing. Knowledge of the background of some of the products that are there, like Exchange and SharePoint, where they came from, because their baggage, and all products have baggage, their baggage still exists inside Office 365, and bubbles to the surface in very bad places sometimes. Then just conversations with people. I mean, Ignite is a great example of a place where the conversations there can keep you going for a complete year in terms of understanding the background of what Microsoft is trying to do, their own internal processes, their own internal power battles. And there are power battles. I mean, two quotes from earlier this year. One Microsoft vice president said, to get something done inside Office 365 across the entire service takes the buy-in from 11 vice presidents. That gives, that's organization politics at work. Another quote from a very senior development manager said, Teams stands on the shoulders of just about every Microsoft technology you care to mention. So that gives you an indication of the complexity of the interconnections that exist inside Office 365. And I guess what we do is we look at all these interconnections, we look at the technology, we look at how it works, and we look at it through a lens, which is probably, it's partly informed by experience, it's partly informed by a little bit of cynicism, I gotta say, at times.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to believe all the marketing hype that exists around these products, and a lot of questioning, and we come up with whatever we come up with based on that foundation.
Yeah, and as soon as I said, I started talking about knowing it inside out and looking from the outside in. Perhaps a lot of people are looking from the outside in, but of course, as soon as I said it, I realised you obviously wrote a lot of the inside out books as well, didn't you? And that's in a similar way where you were able to sort of go behind the curtain and ask those questions. A lot of the book is informed by that view of what Microsoft, how Microsoft designed it to work, and as you say, some of the inherent baggage or
Yep.
or interactions that people might not otherwise
are just asking questions. I mean, everybody's got their own personal network of contacts, and we're no different. So when we hit something that we don't understand, we reach out to our contacts. Our contacts might be other MVPs, might be people inside Microsoft, might be other industry experts, and we just collect information and refine it. So I guess we're no different to the likes of Gartner or some other analyst company in that respect. Mind you, we're a little bit more truthful because, well, I won't go down that path, shall I?
Well, I think that's the value, isn't it? Because it's not marketing, is it? It's not trying to convince somebody to go down the route. And
I make that point time and time again. Actually, it's just before people make decisions about how to use Office 365, they got to know Office 365. A classic example of this is people who listen to all the, and some of the FUD is pretty awful, but the FUD about backups, the need for backups. So, okay, you might need backups. You might be forced to do that. It might be your own organizational requirements. It might be some audit requirements, some legal requirements, whatever. But before you go and invest in anything, understand exactly what you can do with Office 365. Because the view that people have of Office 365 could be misformed. And certainly some of the FUD put out by backup vendors in particular is pretty awesome in that respect. Some of it is outdated, and that's just a reflection of the fact that the service keeps on changing, and what you thought of today might not necessarily be true in 6 months' time. And some of it is just biased.
Yeah.
So say, okay, especially bias could come about through many reasons. One of them might be the person's own background. You know, if they come from a SharePoint background or an Exchange background, they're going to have an inherent bias about the way things should be done. So take all that off the table, find out what Office 365 can really do, what functionality you are paying for today.
Okay? And that's what can make it quite complicated, because if you're reading articles or listening to podcasts or watching videos like this, and people are saying you don't need backups because you can switch on all of these different features, and then it turns out that your small business, it's a prime example, has licensing that doesn't include all of this functionality, and it'd be a big step up, then yes, sometimes these products have a place, don't they? And
oh yeah, and by the way, they also have a place even if you deploy the full range of Office 365. I mean, I covered this the other day in a Petri article where a customer from Indonesia came to me and said, look, I got infected by ransomware. And as it turns out, I thought that I'd be able to use the out-of-the-box SharePoint restore my library, or restore this library feature to roll back to the point before ransomware took effect. And they ran smack into a couple of problems with that particular feature. It couldn't deal with the number of files in the folder. I think there were about 36,000 files. So, you know, as an example of a feature that may not have been tested past, say, 32,000 files in a 32,767, one of those magic numbers. They ran into horrible problems, and they ended up losing a lot of data. So sometimes third-party backup solutions really do fill in those gaps. And I have no problem with somebody who says, look, I've done all the analysis, I've done the hard work to understand what the third-party solution is going to give me, how much it's going to cost, what it's going to add to my operational processes and procedures. I know how it's going to complement or replace some of the standard technology. I'm happy with that. But say, you know what, you've done your work. You have done your due diligence. Go forth and use the product. That's good.
And the book is about bringing people up to that level of understanding where then they can make informed decisions.
No, the book is probably there to prompt people to ask questions. Because I keep on saying at conferences and sessions, I've said this for years and years and years, going back a long time. So even the best consultant in the world, you take any hotshot Office 365 consultant, bring them into a tenant or an organization, they only have 50% of the answer. That 50% comes from their skills, their experience, their background, their knowledge. The other 50% comes from the organization itself. It's the structure of the organization, the business of the organization, the connections within the organization, the business needs and requirements, and regulatory context of the organization has to work in. Put the two of them together and you have 100% answer. So I think our role in life is to give the people within the organization a sense of the questions that they need to ask about Office 365 before they go and deploy.
So my read of the book was it helps you understand how all this functionality works, and in some cases how to do certain things with it, but it doesn't teach you how to architect Office 365 to meet your business needs. And it's not Office 365 for enterprise architects, for example. That's not the name of the book, or Office 365 for adoption consultants. It'd be a good read for all of those people to learn about some of those technologies, dip in and dip out. But
those people are IT professionals, by the way.
Yes, they are, and that's a whole debate: who is and who isn't in itself. But it's not trying to teach them to be something beyond that. It is really about some of the core functionality, you know, that I dived into the book, and I learned things almost immediately that would have potentially no relevance to how I did the job, but I found very interesting how many servers there are, and how the service has evolved, and the numbers of users on it, and putting that into context and it being up to date as well. I found it interesting as a sort of geek out as well at the beginning, and a lot of the information fills in a lot of the gaps that you get as you learn for yourself about the service or you read blog articles. But it's not necessarily an exam prep guide, but it was really sort of taking me through a lot of the detail on how it works, how it's put together, what the different features and functionality do. But it wasn't helping me meet the requirements in the finance industry or something like that. That's the stuff I'd need to bring and apply what I'd learned from the book. And I think that's the right approach, because 50% of it is understanding how it all works, how the technology fits together, and then you've got to ask other people, and you've got to help them become informed as well, to then make the right decisions going forward.
We have collectively between us about 60, the author team, about 60 years experience of working with Office cloud-based systems. And I think what we're trying to do is distill that experience down into a form where we can say, hey, this is the interesting stuff we know about. And it's up to you to pick all the stuff out and use it for your purposes. This is not a book to read cover to cover. It's not a book it's not an exam guide. It's not a guide to architecture or anything like that. It's just stuff we as IT pros who have been in this business for a long time find really interesting, and that's the reason why we write about it. That's also the reason why we update it, and we update it as complete books, because when we started on this journey, we were figuring out how are we going to do updates, and some people said we just have a website and put updated stuff on that, and that seemed like a crap approach actually, because essentially what you'd end up doing then is trying to transpose corrections posted on a website into books. That's not going to work. So that drove us to the model where we said every month we are going to have a completely refreshed book. Everything is integrated. You don't have to change anything out. You don't have to transcribe anything. It's all there. And the model that we tried to use is software development, because that's what happens with software development. Every time you release a version, it's a complete version. I mean, you don't go and release a module to a user, say, here you go, user, try this module, this DLL over here, take it and install and everything will be fine. You don't do that. You give them a complete application. And that's what we're trying to do with every month. And there are problems with that approach. Some people have said, for example, okay, great, I get a PDF every month, but I've got all these comments in a PDF from last month. How do I get them across? well, maybe some of those comments are no longer valid because we've now covered the issue or whatever. But you know, we're going to have issues in whatever way we choose to do it, and we've chosen to go along this route, and we think it's working pretty well.
Yeah, I saw it as something that I'd refer to over and over again, because you can't keep up to, you know, you've got loads of blog posts on making various techniques to monitor various channels and get all the latest updates, but there's not really a better way of getting something really up to date, where you can just dive in, and if you need to know about something or get a bit of a refresher, you know it's current, rather than trying to piece together all of the different updates from different places. So I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a really good book. It's trying to cover a lot of things, and it's not really about migrations anymore, though, is it? It's
we took the approach actually of moving a lot of the older material into a companion volume, which is there. We still make that available to people who need it, but we said, you know what, we've gone past that stage. So stuff that's interesting, still valuable, but not as interesting as the new stuff, goes into the companion volume, and it's there for people to read it if they want. But the main book is pretty well our take on what's the most important stuff people need to know about Office 365 right now.
And that's the thing. It's Office 365 and not Microsoft 365, which, one, that's quite a tough line to walk, and over 1,000 pages on Office 365 and not about migrations. It really goes to show how comprehensive the service is.
1183, by the way.
Sorry?
1183, by the way. Latest count.
Wow, okay.
September update.
Yeah. And do you think
we did look at doing more about Microsoft 365, and in fact, Brad Anderson asked us, would we put more in about Office 365? But there are bits of Microsoft 365 that just don't fit well with this kind of book. Windows 10, for example, that's a book on itself.
One thing we mentioned that's exactly what we say in the review, because if you had a section or chapter dedicated to Intune in all of its glory, then you would be talking about co-management with SCCM. You'd be talking about Windows deployment, autopilot, and if you're talking about Windows deployment, that's a book in itself. Or MCAS, then invariably you'll be talking about Windows Defender, ATP as well, Microsoft Defender. You're crossing across a lot of different products, and you actually got to focus on perhaps security and take it from that angle, and you're almost going down into these newer cloud-based type roles, aren't you?
Yeah, well, we're pretty selective. I mean, we do take some stuff. I mean, we can cover things like additional access policies. We cover things like other Azure AD premium features that are covered in EM&S. We have got stuff about Microsoft Cloud App Security, but focused on Office 365. We have got Intune there, but again, focused on Office 365. And I believe there's, don't quote me on this, there might be another book coming, not from us, but it's aligned with us, that goes more directly into Microsoft 365. So we'll see if that comes out. That's a little spur to the potential authors of that potential book to potentially get it out for potentially available sometime later this year, maybe.
Cool. Keep our eyes peeled then for that. Do people ever ask for a physical copy of the book then? It's different going to an ebook.
People print it every month. They take the PDF to their local print facility and they print it off. I'm told this very frequently. We did look at generating a print copy. In fact, the very first edition back at Ignite 2015, Microsoft printed off 500 copies of the book as it was then. It was only about 500 pages long. But the work and the effort required to get out a physical book is phenomenal. And for us to sign up with something like Amazon, they could do it, or the Book Baby, that's another company that specializes in this in the US, you run into three problems. First thing is too many pages. Second, too many graphics. And the third thing is we'd like to update it every month. The models that people have for printing physical books based on ebooks are largely for things like novels that don't change very often, don't have very many graphics, don't cover technical information. So they don't have the kind of formatting that we have at times, for example, for PowerShell code. So what people do is, if they're interested, they, as I say, they take the PDF down to the local Kinko's or whatever your local snap print, whatever it is in your local country, and they print it off. I'm amazed, but they do it.
It's going to be a very regular task thing, because you look at, well, you know, I was surprised looking through the book that it's updated so regularly that there's current stuff from obviously the last couple of months. There's limits change in the service as new functionality gets added, but it is completely up to date, and you couldn't really go back to a physical book model, and it would. You'd have to have a very good reason to want to print a copy and keep that on your desk, unless it was really a sort of one-off and you're planning to really sort of use it over a couple of months and, you know, like many books, put it back on the shelf then and never refer to it again.
And that's not what we want to have. We want to have a living book. So to give two examples, for the August 2019 update, we updated 20 chapters of the 24. For the September, we're not quite finished yet as we take this, but I think we probably update 17. Now, they're what we call major changes. We've got new content, or we're removing content, or whatever. But I can tell you there's a lot of smaller changes where we might change a word here, or we might look at a paragraph or a section and say, don't like the way that's written, let's rewrite it. I mean, we do that all the time. So it's a printing book. Oh my gosh, it would just be a colossal task. It wouldn't work.
So before we go, are you going to be at Microsoft Ignite this year? For people that want to come along, are you going to be speaking?
Yep, I have 3 sessions on a podcast. One of them, I'm doing 2 sessions on Teams. And I'm doing a session with the Exchange group about some new technology that they're bringing in for PowerShell that I can't talk about too much at the moment. I'll say that. And we're doing a podcast there with Paul Robichaud, the regular podcast that we do. So so I'll be a busy boy.
Okay, so people will be able to see you there, and hopefully I'll see you there as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much for joining us on Practical 365 today.
My pleasure.